Today on the Basketball Manitoba podcast, we have Kirby Schepp. Kirby is the head coach of the University of Manitoba Bisons, a position he's held for the last 12 seasons. During his time with the Bisons, they've made the postseason 8 times, have had 3 Canada West Final Four appearances, and made the national tournament for the first time since 1986. Kirby has been part of the Canada men's national team program for over a decade. He coached the 17U Cadet team in 2010 that won a bronze medal at the World Championships. Additionally, he won a gold medal with the junior national team in 2017 and won a silver medal at the Commonwealth Games in 2018. Kirby has coached high school and club teams for over 15 years, as well as serving as an assistant at the University of Winnipeg for 5 years. Additionally, he's coached many provincial teams with Basketball Manitoba. He is a University of Winnipeg graduate where he played for the Westmen. Kirby has a master's degree in coaching from the University of Victoria. He is an NCCP Master Learning Facilitator and has trained hundreds of coaches over the past 20 years. Now, here's my conversation with Kirby Schepp. All right, and we are live with Kirby Schepp on the Basketball Manitoba podcast. Kirby, welcome.
Thanks, Darcy. Happy to be here, bud.
So, I was talking to you offline, kind of giving you the gist of what the podcast is about. And I kind of told you, hey, you know what? We want stories. We want narrative. We want to hear about basketball in Manitoba. And obviously, you know, you've been involved in the game for so long now at, I want to say almost every level that existed in here in Manitoba. But I wanted to kind of think, you know, you've never coached me before. Now, you've coached some of my friends and plenty of players my age. But one of my first memories of you was actually when you were back at Silver Heights. And I was in the 11th grade, and there must have been a tournament there or something because you weren't in our league. And we played at the Silver Heights gym. Now, I don't really remember much specifically about you. I just remember that you were the coach of the team and that your team just played super hard. I mean, that, you know, some of the players on that team, you guys just worked like crazy. So that's kind of my first memory of you. When I think back, I'm like, how long have I known Kirby? When did I first see Kirby? So I'm curious, but what are some of your first basketball memories?
Oh man, jeez. I mean, I'm trying to specifically remember that one that you told me, but I'm not too sure why you would have been there or what would have been going on there.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I want to say it was like a tournament or something, but because you know, Silver Heights, like we wouldn't have played you unless it was a tournament. So
yeah, for sure.
So maybe it wasn't even at Silver Heights, but I just remember it being out that way. But again, like I said, that's kind of my first memory, and it's interesting when you kind of think that every time I interview someone, if I know them, like when was the first time I saw them, interacted with them? Sure. But anyways, in saying that, like, what are some of your first memories? You know, from with the game of basketball.
Yeah, I mean, I started playing, and you know, kids that are coming up today can play so young, but we couldn't play. You know, there wasn't really organized basketball until you got to junior high, right? So that's when you could really start to play. I didn't play in 7th grade, and I don't think I was much of an athlete necessarily. I wasn't playing a million sports growing up, and did a few different very small things, but I started playing basketball, I think, because my older brother played basketball. So I thought, hey, I'll try out. I think a couple of my friends were trying out for the team, and I played in grade 8. And my very first memories were of just being really, really shitty at basketball. So I had two junior high coaches, Colin Fraser and Steve Peck, and they were great guys and great to sort of introduce the game just because of who they were as people. And I still ran into Steve every now and again, was a firefighter in town, and I ran into Colin. Colin used to work at U of M, and be a bit of a basketball family in St. James. Mm-hmm. But I played at junior high, and I was the last guy on the bench. I can remember, almost quitting. At one point, we had I didn't sub into a game for 3 straight games. Did not get on the court, and deservedly so. So it was, But then I started playing, and I think my real memories were of just playing outside and, often by myself. I used to go to Voyageur School in St. James. I used to take my ball down there and just shoot aside. I didn't have a hoop of my own, and just shoot and dribble. And sometimes my friends would be there and playing, but a lot of times it was by myself. And for me, through that first period, basketball was a bit of a solitary thing because there wasn't a lot of my friends playing. And I think I fell in love with just being on the court. And there's a great poem that I don't have the book because I always lend it out to people. It's a great book if anyone wants to read it, called Stuff Good Players Should Know by Dick DeVenzio. And within it, about midway through it, there's a little poem. And I'm going to screw it up a little bit, but I'm going to try here. And it goes along the lines of something along the lines of, sometimes, especially outside, when it gets dark and it's just you alone with a ball on the court, the feeling is a combination of dream and meditation and love. And that really stuck with me because that was my experience first, was going to the court and just it being dark out and there's a distant light and I'm just shooting by myself over and over and over and over. And to me, that was falling in love with the game, right? I think I fell in love with working on my game. And then, of course, that took me to the point where, I started to actually become a decent player, a decent high school player, although on a terrible high school team. And where I got really fortunate was I walked on at U of W and didn't know what I was doing. I just went to UW again because my brother went to U of W, and walked on, and Bill Wedlick somehow gave me a chance on with what was the number one preseason team in the country. Somehow I walked on and made it. I wasn't a ranked player. I was kind of nobody. I took a year off after high school, then walked on after that. And what really helped me out was my now good friend, Steve Newton, because he came from Ontario and his grades weren't quite high enough. He wasn't eligible for a scholarship in his first year, so they had an extra scholarship. So
okay.
13th man, which was me. You imagine the random fortunes that land you where you were, right? And then, and then got lucky to play for a great coach, Bill Wedlick. And Bill, all the things I learned from Bill, I had learned nothing. I had no concept of what help defense was until I played. I had no concept of what an offense was. When I was in grade 12, our team was so bad, my offense was at one point, give the ball to me on the right side, everyone go to the left side, and I could drive right. That's what I was good at, driving right, drive right, pull up, jump shot.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, but I was really fortunate that those people gave me a chance. And then, so there's a random luck of, getting into coaching, which really took me into the second phase, which we can talk about after. But of coaching was in the class that Bill taught, Basketball 1 or Basketball 2, I think it was. One of the assignments was you had to go to a school and observe practices. So my school, because I lived in St. James and he wouldn't let me go back to my old school, was Silver Heights Collegiate. So I went to Silver Heights. Guys by the name of Clarence Vigilance were on that team. Joel Rodriguez, Steve Tackey, those guys were on that team.
Yeah.
I went and watched them play, watched a couple practices, whatever. I remember watching them play against Todd McCullough and Todd dominate them and have rebounds. But anyway, so that next year I actually got cut from U of W. Bill cut me, and I got a phone call from a guy named Ron Pasechnik at Silver Heights. And Ron was like the manager guy who didn't, I don't think he was at that point in his career interested in coaching, but he was interested in helping facilitate other people coaching. So he called me up and he said, hey, I heard you're not playing. Do you want to coach? So I went and helped him out. And I remember the first practice, I ran a couple of drills and he ran the practice. And the second practice, I ran about half the practice and he ran half the practice. And the third practice, Ron said to me, hey, listen, I've got a meeting. I can't make it to this practice. And that was the last time he showed up. So he basically dumped the team on me. And from then on, I was the head coach. So, and then that, 14 years later, I was still the head coach and, trying to build that program a little bit as best I could and immersed myself in coaching, which is another whole story. But that's my sort of earliest, stories and upbringing of it. So.
Well, it's funny. It sounds like he planned that the whole time.
100%.
Well, I got a meeting. He never comes back.
Right. And then all of a sudden he had meetings all the time but I'll tell you what for a young coach like me, I think one of the things that could have and often does push young coaches out of coaching is the non-basketball piece of it. And I was just really fortunate. So what he did was we ran a fundraiser, he ran it. We did scheduling, we ordered uniforms, we did all that stuff. He literally handled all of that for about my first 6 years, all of it. So and all I did was show up and plan practice and coach the kids. So in a way, again, it's luck again, right? Like that probably kept me in coaching, right?
Yeah. He almost was like he was like your manager almost in a sense.
100%, and incredible, right? So it was good. And you know what, Ron taught me a lot of great things. I'll share another Ron Possession story that I think is pretty cool. And I think the greatest lesson he taught me was I can remember being in the staff room at Silver Heights, and he was, right around retirement age, so maybe about his 4th or 5th year coaching, and he was about to go, and there was, teachers milling about, and this one particular teacher came in, and I guess they had a problem with a student, and the student was being a bit of a shit, and they were just openly complaining about how rude and disrespectful this student was, and they will use one phrase. This teacher used one phrase, said, so and so is a bad kid. And Ron kind of went silent, and he just kind of looked at me, and then that teacher walked away, and he goes, you know what? He said, I've been teaching 38 years, he said. There are no bad kids. There's none. You may have struggles with them at some time, but they're not bad kids. He goes, I have not taught a single bad kid. He goes, you don't think they're a bad kid? Get to know them better.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me. And it stuck with me as a teacher and as a coach. And I started to think if I'm ever having issues like that or ever, I just need to get to know them better. That has rung true throughout my teaching, throughout my coaching career. It's just, you're having struggles. The answer is develop the relationship better. So, and that was the greatest lesson that Ron ever taught me, for sure.
Wow. Well, that's a great point. I mean, just understanding that we're people, you know what I mean? Regardless of what's going on. And I think we lose sight of that often, right? We're so fixated on outcomes, right? We're trying to achieve an outcome or we want things to be the way we expect them to be. We want people to act the way we expect them to act. And when they don't, we're quick to label them, right? Bad, or they don't listen, whatever the thing may be. And I think that's some really great advice. Yeah. And since the good thing about you, Kirby, is what I love is because you are, people have marveled, and I don't say this lightly because you're great at presenting. You've done great presentations at coaches clinics. People I've heard, hey, Kirby was awesome. So I love it because you've pretty much cleared out 3-4 of my first questions. I just said, hey, what was your first basketball memory? And you're just like, boom, 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 boom. So I love it. You're making it easy for me. But I want to kind of dig in a little closer on some of your mentors. I know you had mentioned Ron, and you actually told something, a lesson you learned from him that you still kind of to this day you still keep at the top of your mind. But I was wondering if you can expand on that, maybe talk about some of your other mentors. I know you had mentioned Bill, and maybe some other lessons that you still use today, just in your everyday life, and more specifically, just in your coaching.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that Ron was a real big one, and he was important for me in many regards that way. But as you mentioned, I've had a number of good teachers. My high school coach was a man named Steve Cara, and Steve was just a great. I don't think he would describe himself as a basketball person, right? I don't think his X's and O's were super high, and but everyone wanted to play because Mr. Cara was the coach, right? And he was just so good at developing the relationships and keeping calm and keeping everything in perspective. And, that was tremendous for me. But then, where I learned, the game and the work ethic in many ways was from Bill Wedlick. So Bill taught me a number of things that I think was really big. And his ability to teach was second to none. His just ability to break things down from large concepts into very small bite-sized pieces and lay them out to people, as well as his ability to prepare. I think we were the most prepared team in the country. So He was absolutely tremendous in that, in the way he would do those things. Now, the other things, we would criticize Bill for different game day stuff and that kind of thing. Get really emotional and fired up and that kind of stuff. And I think you learn from that as well. And I learned from, wow, if I was like my high school coach, Steve Cara, in terms of their game and being in control, but also like Bill in terms of my ability to teach and my ability to prepare and work ethic and all those things, wow, that would be, that's kind of what you're striving for, is to take those.
Yes.
Now, since then, and I've gotten older, it's been harder, I think, to find mentors. The one guy that comes to mind that I think has been big for me is a guy by the name of Steve Konchalski. So Steve is the coach, or former coach now, at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. So, Coach K, as he's affectionately known, is a legend in Canadian basketball. And what Coach K is, when my last 10 whatever 12 years or so I've been involved with the national team program, Coach was assigned essentially as a mentor coach, and he would come on these trips, and for me, what I found amazing with Coach, I think I learned enough from him, and I think I'm still trying to learn this, is learning when to listen and when to speak. I mean, so there's a guy who literally has been coaching high-level basketball for as long as I've been alive. Mm-hmm. And we would be in meetings where he would just watch us work and say nothing, say absolutely nothing, and be the quietest guy in the room. But then when anyone ever looked at him, or when it was the right moment to say something, really profound, he would say something, and it would routinely just silence the room, where everyone would take a second and reflect on, oh yeah, that's what we've been missing. And but he could probably say stuff all the time, but he just knows enough. Sometimes I think we talk so much that we're not heard, right? And we need to know when to be heard, right? And I think, I've learned that from Coach tremendously. And many of those things the best thing about my experience with Coach is I've been able to travel all around the world with basketball, and he's been with me a lot of the way. But it's oftentimes he likes to end his day with a walk, which I think is a really interesting habit, where he just goes on about a 20-minute walk wherever he is before he gets ready for bed. He just goes for a walk by himself. And I don't know if that's to collect his thoughts or to just a little exercise before bed or whatever, but he goes for a walk. And I think that's something he's learned from Coach Jack Donahue, another Canadian legend, where that was his mentor. But because Coach used to go on these, long walks with players and that, but Coach and I would go for walks, we'd talk. A lot of times we've had beers. Coach and I have had beers in Germany, Brazil, Argentina, Italy, Spain, Greece, U.S., Mexico. We've had a beer, and it was end of the night, we'd have one beer and go for a walk. And tell you what, I learned a tremendous amount over those beers and walks from a legendary coach. So those would be a few.
So have you implemented any ritual stuff? I'm something that I wouldn't say obsessed with, but I like to focus on is things that people like rituals or strategies people implement in their day-to-day life. You mentioned the walk. Are there things that you do as a coach, whether it be pre-game, post-game, post-practice, pre-practice, that's consistent, but it's not directly basketball, right? So I know people meditate, read, go for walks, work out. Is there anything that you implement to kind of just optimize you and just get you ready to coach games?
I'm trying to think of what am I doing to coach games. There's a number of different things that I'll do, but it's more technical preparation. One of the things I started to do with my national team was I would meet with assistant coaches pre-game. So we'd have a very set, where we'd have a set meeting talking about game plan. We'd obviously meet with the team and talk game plan, and we'd have a bit of a longer warm-up. But I'd have a period where I started to ready myself, because the meeting with the coaches, we were readying ourselves for what we call if-thens. So, if this happens, then we're going to do this. If that happens, then we're going to do that, right? And that kind of stuff. So things don't go well, here's a lineup change. If they come out and do something different, here's how we would counter it, right? And it's really just a mental rehearsal thing, right? So, but then we started doing because especially in FIBA, end of games become so crucial because you have such little impact, but you have a big impact in a very small number of times, where it's end of, could be ATOs, could be quarter breaks, could be those 2 to 3 timeouts at the end of games where you can start to impact things, right? So we would have like pre-planned situations. So I would sit down with one of my assistants, a guy by the name of Kevin Duffy, who was just left Acadie actually last week. But he would sit down and have a list of things, and I would have my whiteboard, and he'd be, something along the lines of, okay, down 3, under 10, side out, go. And I would tell him it as if I was in the timeout, and I'd have to do it in under about 30 seconds and as clear as possible, right? Then he'd say, okay, full court, up 3, under 20, they're fouling. Whatever. What's your safe inbound? Okay, blob, 1 second left. Blob, 10 seconds left. Blob, need a 3. And we'd start to just go, and I would just have to go, right? Because I found that was an area of weakness for me, and I think that I wasn't clear. I mean, they could tell. I know you could tell. I bet you, Malik Irwin, who I know you've had on your podcast, could probably tell stories of me. I remember drawing up something at the end of a Bison game, and Malik was on the floor, and literally I drew up a play for 4 people. And at the end of the timeout, I didn't say where Malik was, and Malik looked at me and said, "Where am I?" And I didn't have him anywhere. And I'm like, you just fucking go stand.
Yeah, go over there. Yeah.
I didn't have anything, right?
Yeah.
So it's something you got to get better at. I mean, as coaches, we need to get better at a number of those things. So I know for me here, and I don't know if they're good or bad, but probably some of them aren't great rituals. But we'll always meet, especially after the Friday night game. We always meet in my office. We debrief. I take some immediate thoughts from all the assistant coaches on what they thought went well or didn't go well. What do we need to focus on? What do we need to show cuts of? Okay, and then I'll start watching game film, right? So, I'll do one thing before I watch game film, because I find I'm a little bit high strung. So, I don't know, maybe don't tell my boss this, but I don't think they care. But I've got a fridge in my office, and I'll usually have 2 beers right after, just to take a little bit of the edge off, and then and then I start to watch my game film. So, and I find for me, I have a really hard time going home and going to sleep unless I'm completely ready for tomorrow's game plan. So I have to be, I have like my sheet printed up, my practice plan for the walkthrough, my stats I'm going to do, all my video cut, and then I have a hard time relaxing my mind unless that's done. Get that out of the way. So sometimes I'll be here until 2 a.m. or so, getting all that done, and then I can go home and go to bed, and then I can show up to practice.
Yeah.
That's not a good practice to probably follow out there, and that's just me. So,
well, no, I think it's good. You give people a little insight of kind of what the process that you that works for you. And I think, like you said, you talked about mentors. You're taking a bit here, taking a bit there. So someone listening to this is, you know what? Let me try that. Maybe they're struggling with after games, and they have games the next day, and they're like, I can't sleep. And they've never thought why, and this could be that. So if it works for you, it works for somebody.
Since then, I've used meditation to try to go to sleep, actually. So, which has been pretty successful. So
no, meditation is great. I mean, that's just anyone and everyone, I think, should meditate. I'm such a fond person of meditation that I feel like it should not be forced in school, but it should be an option. Like there should be, and it should be part of health and wellness class. It should be part of a gym class. And I think that's just, again, a no brainer. You had actually mentioned earlier in the poem that you were talking about how, being by yourself and playing basketball is somewhat of a meditation. It's not somewhat, it is a meditation. And some of my I wouldn't say my fondest basketball memories, but like you had mentioned, some of the most meaningful were just when you're by yourself, like the gym's completely empty or you're outside completely empty, and you don't realize it unless you've meditated before. You don't realize that actually is a meditation, because all you're focused on is what's happening right then and there. Like that's it. Like you're focused on, I'm taking this step, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. It's so meditative, because meditation is, if you're talking about this type of that mindfulness meditation, it literally is meditation. But now again, for a coach, I mean, you can't necessarily do that. I mean, you could, but so I think for anyone who's out there listening, Kirby Schepp meditates. You want to be a successful coach, go ahead, start meditating. But what something it's interesting. We kind of touched on this earlier as well, and something that I've just learned, as I've aged and interacted with more people and been through more experiences, that regardless of what you're doing, I don't care what the industry is, what the job is, this is almost across the board the case that regardless of what you're doing, it's a people thing, right? It doesn't matter what it is. You're going to deal with people. And we kind of touched on that before. It's like the outcomes of something versus like, the person themselves. And so in saying all that, I was just curious, what are some of the strategies, or, for lack of a better word, the tricks, you might use to kind of build culture with your teams?
So you're absolutely spot on. And, I made that realization a number of years ago where you started to realize, identify that I'm not coaching basketball. I'm coaching people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a really important realization, I think, for coaches to make. And the second one, I think, that relates to culture is that I think a realization that I think coaches need to make is the players aren't playing for you, right?
Yeah.
They're playing because they love the sport and they love the game. You're coaching for them.
Yes.
They're not playing for you. And I think that's a really crucial, because the concept of that starts to remove the ego from the situation. I think we as coaches start to get into things and start to, it's very much part of the U.S. college coaching system, right? Where the head coach is the prominent individual in the program, and they're the face of the program because they're there every year, and the players, are kind of on a rolling, are inconsistent and they come and go, but the coach is there, right? Whether it's, Rick Pitino or, whoever, Dean Smith or whoever the coach is there, the guy, Jim Boeheim, right? And become this ego. And I think I hate that phrase all the time, and it makes me cringe every time I hear, oh, so-and-so played for me. No, if anything, what we're trying to get them to do is not play for you. We're trying, because it's so flighty, it's so transient, right? We're trying to get them to actually play for each other, to play for their teammates, to play for the larger vision of why you're there. And I think that's what you have to immediately, that to me is the culture center, is what are we playing for? So for me, because culture is about like having a strong base for when things get rough, right? Everyone has a great culture when, hey, we're winning and it's easy, and it's fun, right? Like we had, practice number 1 here yesterday. We got a great culture. Everyone's high-fiving, right? But I know probably by about the end of week 2, I'll probably have to separate a couple guys. We'll probably, right? Because now they're going to start to realize, oh, this guy's trying to take my spot, and there's a pecking order, and there's, we had that, I'll tell you, a few years ago, we had a couple of great players come through our program very recently, Rashawn Brown and Justice Aline. Justice was a first-team CanWest All-Star, led the league in scoring, and Rashawn was an All-Canadian 2 years later. As soon as Rashawn showed up, it was very clear. It's like, oh, we don't know who the best player in the gym is anymore. And by practice 4, like they were ready to fight each other. So then we had to, right. So we have to get to a point where we understand what we're playing for. And I think that's the key part of culture. And for me, I look at it in terms of like a spider web, right? That the more ways, when a spider starts to form their web, they start to form a spines out to the middle. It might be 3 or 4 or 5. And then they'll start to form, 20 spines to the middle. And those spines are all flowing in the wind and they're not connected. And then slowly the spider web usually starts at the outside and it starts to connect those spines in a circle, going around and around and around. And the more it connects each spine, the stronger the web is and the more flies it can catch, right? So for me, what I'm trying to do is all these guys are these sort of initial spines of the web. And all I'm trying to do is find ways to connect them. For that, we have to build building culture is about building, a couple different things, building some of those values and communities. So to me, the things that connect those guys are shared experiences and
Mhm.
shared values. So, I share this with, let's say, let's see, like, why is your family your family? Why are, we use the term family way too much in sports,
Mhm.
right? It's not really a family, but why are those people in your family, like me, and I mentioned my brother. So me and my brother are very different political views, but ultimately we're still family. So
Mhm.
what connects us? Well, we had a whole bunch of shared experiences. Sometimes those experiences are good, like Christmas morning or family dinners or whatever, and
Yep.
sometimes they're bad, right? When I ratted him out for, having a weed plant in his room when he was 15, or like, and there was a fight, or when he hit me with a 2x4, there's bad experiences too, and there's adverse experiences. But
Sure.
also there's shared values because we're part of the same family. There's things that we have in common that are
Mhm.
important to us, to our core. So when we are working with a team, I think of it as building culture is connecting those people as much as we possibly can to where we have the same values. That could be how hard we work in practice, being on time, how we respect and treat each other.
Mhm.
What do we value on the basketball court? What do we value defensively, rebounding, transition, shot selection? Those are maybe small things that are there, right? Then there's also, shared experiences, right? Where, like, could be a really hard practice, could be a tough loss, could be a great win, could be, something you go do, team bonding. A lot of them are team dinners. I'm a big believer in sharing a meal with someone is a
Yes.
tremendous connector. Sitting down and actually sharing
Yep.
food together is
Yep.
a tremendous connector, right? Those kinds of things. So
Mhm.
what I'm thinking right now at this time of the year, and we're starting, it's of September 8th right now, is that's all I'm thinking about is trying to create, shared values and shared experiences to
Mhm.
connect to that group.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that the analogy of the spider web. Makes sense. So
Yeah,
it's a nice way to frame it and have a visual for that.
right.
That's great. Um, so just I'm focusing on players. No, something that I heard actually, and I'm almost positive it was you who said this. I'm just going to say it was. I'm sure you'll agree with the statement, but I'm pretty sure you said this, and it was something along the lines that you said that here in Manitoba, we underrate our players, we underrate ourselves even, right? In a sense that, like, when someone's playing locally, we don't think they're as good as X, Y, and Z player elsewhere. And I kind of later, and again, I come to find later on that was kind of true for Winnipeg and Manitoba generally. And I can't speak for, I'm sure there's some places where we excel. But just generally speaking, people here tend to undervalue themselves, or we're almost like self-deprecating in a sense, like, oh, we're not good, or this, that. I wouldn't say it's a self-hatred, but you kind of know where I'm going with, where you
You're
can see where
going
I'm going with
complex a
this.
little bit, right?
Exactly. And so, in saying that, I mean, again, you can answer after I ask the question, did you actually say that, or do you agree with it? But what are some reasons why a player should stay home and play in Manitoba or in Canada versus playing in the United States if they have the opportunity?
It's an interesting. It's always a tough choice in terms of that. I'm not sure if I said it or not, but
But do you agree with it? I guess that
yeah,
statement.
you're. I think from the context that you're asking the question, I think we oftentimes look at it and think, and it's a natural thing, is that
Hmm.
if I go away, then it's better than here,
Hmm.
right? So, and I think that's one of the challenges I deal with in, say, recruiting or different things, and
Well, just before you get into it, something that I've noticed is that you'll see players who are good here, and we're like, ah, they're fine, they're fine. But it takes them going elsewhere and competing against other, kids or whatever, adults, whoever they may be. And then we're like, oh, they're good, or they can play, or they go play somewhere else. And then we're like, oh, they're actually good. Where when they were here, we're like, I don't know, they're not that good. And that was kind of that first sentence, the statement I made there.
sure. So I think, I mean, sometimes if you I wonder. It makes you feel better about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go. So then,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're not that good. They're just like us, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes there's, especially as you get older in the game, and this always drives me nuts that, the old heads, sometimes they'll look at it and they like to say, somehow it was better when I played, right? And, oh, well, players think it's better. Nothing could be further from the truth. Players are so much better today than they were 20, 30 years ago. They are. The skill level's higher. There's more athletes. They're better,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That's not to discount, players of the past. If we had some of the advantages and benefits, and if I didn't start basketball to grade 8, like most of us, then sure, maybe I would have been better too, but it doesn't mean they aren't better, right? So there's a lot of that, that kind of goes on, I think. But in terms of your other question, in terms of how do you, in terms of playing here, it's really an individual situation. There's lots to look at. I think players sometimes, or athletes and parents and whatever, they just look at their kind of individual situation and what's good for me instead of looking at, how has it worked for other people. I think there's not a lot of learning from other people's mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can go away, great. If it's the right fit for you, you're going to get great coaching, you're going to get great education, then you probably should go away, and that's awesome. But a lot of times that's not necessarily the case. The only thing that I really don't like to see is two things: is they go away often to school or to college, or even to more often than prep school.
Yep.
And they pay tremendous amounts of money for an experience that's not very good.
Mm-hmm.
Or they screw up their education. So they go to a school that doesn't value education. They don't even get a high school diploma. It doesn't translate, or they get a really crappy degree at a bad school and it doesn't come out. If you can reconcile all those things, then you probably should go away. A great parameter I always say for going away at almost every level is, how much is it going to cost you? If it's going to cost you a lot, you probably shouldn't go, right? So if wherever you're willing to go to is willing to pay for everything, then they really want you, and it's probably a good thing to go. If you got to pay $50,000 a year to attend a high school, it's probably not in your best interest, right? That's a general kind of rule of thumb, and it's one of the hardest. It's a really tough situation right now, I think, for young players is making those decisions, right? So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're seeing a lot more opportunities for kids to, I guess, I wouldn't say pursue their dreams, but to, I guess, look at other opportunities that are outside of the norm, less traditional opportunities like the prep schools and things like that. I mean, we've seen some, things happening here in Manitoba. Other provinces in Canada have prep opportunities as well. So it isn't as much about, hey, should they, it's less about now, should they go to the States, and more about, should they be leaving their city or their province to pursue other opportunities, or even should they be leaving their high school to pursue opportunities that are maybe even locally within their own city. There's just a ton more options out there. And interesting, when you were talking there, you did say it was individual, and as you mentioned, I interviewed Rashawn, and Rashawn kind of gave me his story. He played down south, and he came back and had a phenomenal career in Canada. And then you see other, people like Saki, who's from Winnipeg, and he's, playing in the States, and there's other examples of that as well. So, and then it is really going to vary on from person to person, kind of, I guess, what their desired outcomes are, who their influences are. But I guess,
it's tough to evaluate until you're
done.
That's the hard part. You're going to look back on it, whether it was good or not good, and you don't even know what the other option can be. And I think the biggest thing is, do you have people that are honest with you in your life that have some perspective, that can tell you? And most kids don't. You either have dishonest people that are giving them advice to help their interest, or they have people in their life who are great, honest people who don't know enough about the landscape to make good informed decisions. And that's tough. And I'm not even I can say, well, hey, you can come to me and ask, but I might be biased because I want you to come here instead of so maybe I'm not the guy to listen to. Right?
Exactly. That's interesting. It's interesting. I guess on the goods, looking at the positive, there are just more opportunities generally, and I would say that there are more. I mean, not that more. I say that, and then I'm like, well, actually, more choice isn't always better, but it often confuses the situation and makes it harder. But I think, like you said, if you do have the right people in your corner, having more options can be a good thing. And I think at minimum, at least, I would say that the talent level, like you said, kids are better, and there are opportunities for people to pursue different things because there, again, the world now compared to it was in 20 years ago, as you mentioned, has changed so much. The basketball landscape has changed so much.
Yeah.
If you can tell us, your most memorable basketball story. Now, this can be an actual game, or it can be a moment after a game. It doesn't have to be related to an actual game, a practice, but something that just pops out when I ask you that question. What's your most memorable basketball story?
Oh, there's so many.
And you can tell more than one. But.
There's so many, good and bad. It's hard to. I mean, I could literally fill the next 3 hours.
Well, when I asked you that story, what was some of the first ones that popped up?
Sorry, the first one?
When I asked you, say, hey, I said, what's your most memorable basketball story? What were the first? Because of course, your brain starts firing like crazy.
So many of them are road trips, not basketball related.
Yeah.
Cool experiences. Going to Halifax as a first year guy. With the team, with the University of Winnipeg, we went to Halifax Nationals and playing. I can remember we played Cape Breton in the first round, and of course that's just down the road from Halifax. And being in the arena in Halifax, and hearing about they were going to have so many fans there, and looking in the stands, was there maybe 1,000 fans there, and then all of a sudden, 7,000 people in orange jumpsuits, painted in orange, came in the arena, walked up, beating their drum, chanting to Jeff Foreman, overrated, Super Kings, and and then Jeff giving them 20 and 20 or something. Those were phenomenal. A lot of times it's the times with the guys off the court, right? Yeah. It's probably it's the great moment of people, right? That you see that are I'll throw a name of a kid named TJ Johnson, who just unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. Just really great memories of him, and kids that you coach that just gave it everything, right? And you saw them as seminal moments of their growing up process. Right? So I can't tell too many stories. I'll probably cry, but I can remember playing coaching high school ball. Actually, I have phenomenal memories of, we hosted the St. James Championship. So I was fortunate enough to, this is maybe a little longer story of St. James, because of coaching at St. James, which is a little bit my trajectory of coaching there a little bit. But we when we took over Silver Heights, we were probably one of the worst teams in the province, if not the worst team in the province. And we had, in the 40-year history of the school or something, had never won a league championship and the team had 5 teams in the league or something for most of it. Right? I mean, that's crazy. In 40 years, to lose once. But anyways, we hosted. We built it up, and hosted the league championship. And I believe we lost the first year to a John Taylor team that was Steve Bresden and Casey Gooch, and
I remember those guys.
And then the next year we beat Oak Park in the final, and we had Phil Swart and the DeMappy brothers, and really good team. I think it was TJ had just left that team. He had played the year before against Bill and Casey, and Jimmy Martinez was on that first team. Great guys. All right, so I could go. The Burns brothers were on those teams. I could go. Just unbelievable people and families. So I can remember literally having fans on your bench around every possible inch. The kids are sitting on the sideline and have to pick up their feet as players run past them. So they have their feet on the court short because
Yeah.
and then you have to lift your feet up while players run by, right? Like
Wow.
as if your mom is vacuuming, right?
Yeah.
And those are great, great memory. And then keeping coaching, that was like the next championships were at St. James Collegiate, and I can remember beating Oak Park. We lost Oak Park in an overtime game where we drew up a play to score at the buzzer. A guy by the name of Chris Kennington, which I still call that play to this day Kennington, but to send it to overtime and won. And then we ended up losing in overtime that year, and then beat them the next year. And I remember a young man by the name of Harlow Larkin hitting free throws while all the guys who had beat us from Oak Park were taunting him. And every time Harlow hit a free throw, he'd turn and look at them and stuff and make the clutch free throws. And those are great.
Oh, man.
But there's other great experiences there. Like I can remember coached a guy a number of years ago by the name of Eric Zimmerman. So Eric, I just ran into Craig Benston. I think he told me Eric was engaged now or something. And I can remember we were playing a nothing preseason tournament at Miles Mac, and I won't mention the other player involved here, but it was one of our bench guys. And it was the 12th, 13th man that gets in at the end of the game. We were up by 30 or something, and all the starters on the bench were like kind of cheering for him every time he got the ball, and like over cheering, right? Guy, and he misses a couple layups. Yeah. This kid's nervous and anyways, and they're it's too much, right? And you're kind of embarrassing him. And Eric kind of saw that a little bit. And I remember after the game, we go in the locker room, and all the guys were, we were laughing and joking. And then the kid who was in the 13th man at the end, he got changed pretty quickly and left, which is a pretty good indication, right? And and I remember Eric was grade 11 or grade 12, I think. And then he took the time to just shut everybody up in the room. And he said, "Hey guys, he just wants to play like everybody else." Whole room went quiet. And I remember it was one of those moments where you learn to not say anything, because as a coach, you want to pile on there and be like, yeah. But that just took a second. I realized no, right? And then I left the room, and it was really cool. And it made me think little moments like that where you see kids become leaders.
Yeah.
And to me, those are the coolest moments, right?
Yeah.
Those are the coolest moments as a coach. Where you see kids become leaders, right? To me, that's awesome.
For sure. Well, in that same vein, you've mentioned a few names, players you coached. If you had to say off the top of your head, and it can be more than one if there are more than one, but most memorable player you coached at any level. I mean, they stand out to you, and or you've had special moments with them.
Oh man.
I know this is a hard question because you've coached for so long.
So many guys, and honestly, I don't know what I want to single, because there's so many guys at this level here that I've had really, especially the last 5-6 years, that I think I've had really special relationships, and those guys, if they're listening, they know who they are. And that's been cool to me. That's really taken my coaching experience to a different level in terms of the relationships I have with those guys, and that's to me, that's awesome. And but so I'll say one, because because I mentioned him before as a high school coach, was TJ Johnson. So TJ unfortunately was killed in murdered. Actually, we might as well just say it. 2 years ago in Winnipeg, when he got into a dispute with a guy. And TJ, I've never had a player or seen a player play harder than TJ. I don't know if you know him at all. Do you know TJ?
He 39 on us. I don't know how it even happened. I played against him. He's a year older than me, right? So I know, and I played with him later on in senior men's. And when you say you've never seen anyone play as hard as I've never ever played anyone who played that hard in my life.
So that St. John's tournament?
Yeah, it must have been. I'm not quite sure when it was, but yeah.
Was Isaac on that team too?
Yes. So
that
must have been.
I can remember. So I'll tell you that story. So that's a great story. So TJ, he's on TJ. Before that game, I think it might have been the final. Was that final or semifinal? I can't remember.
Not even sure.
Anyway, so we were playing the game, and TJ was our best player. So TJ was a 5'10" post, maybe.
Yeah.
And pretty athletic, but not crazy. And one of his biggest plays was he would shoot before you would expect it, and then throw you out of the way and get his own rebound because he was missing and put it back in. That was basically his biggest move.
Yeah.
Describe, and how tough he was in so many ways. But he, before the game, I remember pulling him aside, and I'm like, I said, like, we don't have anyone to guard Isaac or whatever. And I pulled him aside and I said, hey, there's this guy, Isaac Ansa, and he's really good. Like he's pretty special. And I said, TJ is probably your matchup. And I was going to go into like, he kind of drives right. Or he likes to shoot. Trying to give him some tips on guarding him. And he interrupted me. And he just said to me, Coach, I'm going to kill this guy. Get to him. So I'm just like, okay, don't get me wrong. TJ's not a better player than Isaac. It's not close, right? He's not. But he had 38.
Yes. The fact that I even remember that.
Yeah. And he was, but I'll tell you a great story. My great TJ story that I think sums up who he is. And there's a number of stories where, it was 30-point games where he would, like, literally we're up 30 or down 30. I can't remember. And he would like dive into the stands and like crash head first to get a loose ball when the game is over. And it was one of his biggest weaknesses, is he didn't have the ability to turn it off.
Yeah.
And but his also stubbornness was what made him good, and ultimately might have really cost him, almost cost him his life later on.
Mm-hmm.
He when he was in grade 10 or so, when I first coached him in grade 11, I remember he came, and it was I might have been coaching him in the spring or summer tournament, and he had a big scar on his head, like a line here. You could see it through his hairline. And I was like, TJ, what happened there? What's the story there? That's a big scar. And he's like, he goes, so his mom at the time lived kind of West End, like closer to UW area. He took the bus down, and one day, and this is going to date the story a little bit, but he's walking down, and he had a Discman. Remember Discmans, right?
Oh yeah.
For those that don't know,
I feel like, what's that?
Player that was on your hip, right? Yes. If you read the really fancy one, it wouldn't skip, right? But anyway.
Oh yeah.
And you had the headphones and whatever. So he was walking home as a Discman, and there were some local gang kids. I think they were, I won't even mention the gang, but some local gang kids that approached him and basically said, give me your Discman.
Yeah.
And of course, TJ being TJ, there was like 4 of them and 1 of him, and he said, F you, right?
Yeah.
Give me my Discman. So some guy hits him. He starts fighting that guy. Another guy hits him. He starts fighting that guy. Guy takes out a pool ball in a sock, right? Cracks him on the head with it. He's now got blood covering his whole shirt, down his face, because your scalp bleeds like crazy. He keeps fighting. Some guy grabs his Discman. He tackles him, rips his Discman away, runs away from the guys. He says to me, but you know what, Coach? And I'm going to curse right now. Sorry. He says, they didn't get my like, and that's TJ.
Yeah.
That's who he was.
Yeah.
That's who he was, right? Yeah. And he was, and TJ and I had a pretty good off the court relationship, and he and I stayed in touch right up until the time he died. We went for lunch about a month before, and I tried to stay in touch with him. And he had other struggles through his life, and I'll tell you what, he was born with 2 strikes against him, and but he did pretty well for himself. So TJ and I stayed pretty close. We'd go for lunch every now and again, talk to each other. I'd see him at some pickup ball, always give him, and TJ was a great hugger. Yeah, he was a special kid.
Yeah. It's I just, you were talking about TJ's play style, and I think, and you correct me if this is not the right comparison, but you reminded me much of like a Dennis Rodman type. You know what I mean? Where just in like, he's way undersized. It didn't matter. You're like, how is this guy even doing this? It was like that kind of thing. And again, like I said, I played against him later on, in senior men's or in pickup runs, and you always hated playing against him. You loved when he was on your team,
right?
But playing against him, like, especially in a pickup game, like in a game with refs, okay, maybe because he's not going to be able to get away with as much. But in a pickup game, oh my goodness! And
the ability to shut it off, right?
No, didn't matter.
Shut it off.
Didn't matter.
He was, that was him 100%. So I would say Dennis Rodman, but the reverse to offense and defense, because he wasn't a great defender. Really.
No, he
gambled too much. He literally dive for steals, and like he was undersized, but he could score and rebound, right?
Yes, so, yeah. But he just played so hard. I think that's like I said, the fact that I remember the game, and again, Kirby, my memory is crap. So you asked me stories, and I couldn't tell you half of my playing career. I don't remember it, but I remember TJ, and I remember that he gave us the business. Right. And it was more so because I'm like, how is this guy even doing this? It was like that kind of thing. You look later, I'm like, how did he score that many points? Like, this guy's, he's not good. And like you had said, he wasn't talented. He would just got it done. However, he needed to,
He literally got it done on effort alone.
Yeah. Which is crazy. It always reminds me of there's a movie I watched, Higher Learning. I don't know if you remember the scene, and he's like, what do you? It's Lawrence Fishburne. He's talking to Omar Epps, and he goes, and Omar Epps is a sprinter, and he goes, he says, what happens, when if the fastest people in the world are in the race against you, blah blah blah. What are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to run faster. And then he stops and he just sits there, and then Omar Epps gets it. He's like, oh, I'm not trying hard enough. And TJ's a great example of, it's like, not that you want to be, you need to have, I think you need to have different levels, and the people who are the most successful can kind of manage them. But I think that is something that if you could get a young kid to understand what trying hard really is, their success level is going to, you know what I mean? Because you see a lot of kids who are skilled, but they don't give effort. They don't give that. They have more in the tank. They just don't know how to access it. They don't know what to do, or to how to channel that energy. And some people just don't have it, but some people can learn to do it. And I think that's a super underrated skill.
I think it's possible to an extent to learn it. I remember reading a number of books on that topic back in the day, and even my old sports psychologist, Cal Bottle, he used to have a term, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
There's another book that I got a little bit out of it, which was the new toughness training in sports. I wish I had go through my library. I could show it to you here right now. But and it talked about, essentially, you're a performer, right? Okay. So you're just like, if I'm an actor on stage, if I am, Robert De Niro and I'm playing a part, or, I'm out. So Al Pacino isn't the Godfather, but he played, or like, what's his name? Don Corleone or whatever. Right? He's not Don Corleone, but he played him, right?
Yeah.
And you can train yourself by sort of trying to find out, to observe someone who does what you're trying to do in effort intensity, and then fake it.
Yes.
So act like you're that person, and then keep acting like you're that. And the longer you can do it, you'll start to develop some of those habits, right? And some of those kinds of things, right? So it's a tough thing to wrap your head around, but
it really is. And I think it's tough for kids to learn. I mean, I think they almost need someone to guide them, because it's not something that I learned until much later. And even so much so, I played my entire college career, and then later on I had I'll name drop here a little bit. He's a local legend, I should say, active local legend, Graham Bodner, who just plays basketball like crazy. But when I started playing 3x3 with him, and we would be going to shoot and do stuff, and he would be rebounding for me, and he would sprint after the balls, like sprint, like there was no, like a game. He would bowl me, he'd be firing them to me. So much so, when the ball would bounce and it's kind of coming back towards you, he would run up and grab it before I could.
Right.
Like, what the hell is this guy doing? Right. And eventually I, again, started to I saw the behavior and I started doing it for him because he was doing it for me. But then I came to realize, I'm like, okay. So I'm like, this is a skill though. It's like, it's something that you can acquire. And now when I've coached, I don't coach as much as I used to, but I'm coaching, I'm on kids to hustle after boards. And like, this isn't just because you're rebounding. The ball shouldn't go flying and you're busting your ass. You're getting in rebounding position while you're rebounding for someone. Like, this isn't just a casual thing. But just, I guess my point in my story for that is like, you can learn to work hard and kind of what you were saying, the fake it till you make it. Kind of like compartmentalize it. Like, hey, in this thing, I do this. And you just learn in that, whatever that thing is, I do this and that thing. And if you can teach kids that, they don't even realize it, right? But I think that's something that I learned much, much later. And again, I mean, I think more kids could get some of these lessons because it's now, I think, and again, I'm curious about your opinion. We do got to wrap it up soon, but I'm going to ask you a question here about this. Do you feel that, because a lot of the stuff I see online or when I meet kids or I see people coaching people, it's way less about like the effort in something, and it's the focus is so leans so far towards skill development or focusing on skill, and way less on like effort. Yeah. So it's not balanced, and so you see kids who come play and they're hyper skilled, but they're kind of like lazy, or they don't have like a understanding of how to work hard.
For sure. Yeah, I think as you kind of lived there, competing is a skill, right? And that's a skill that's undervalued in terms of how do I just practice competing, right? Mm-hmm. Remember, so for me, developing that was like playing one-on-one against my older brother, who I didn't beat in one-on-one and my older brother was a pretty good high school player. That's what he was, right? And I eventually played college. So, and I was much taller than him and whatever else. So, but I still remember the first time I beat him to a loose ball, like just one time where the ball, one-on-one, and I got there before he did. I remember that moment, like, because I just got it, and that was like, him teaching me how to compete, right?
Yeah.
And the first time I beat him in one-on-one, like, it wasn't until I was in college and I beat him in one-on-one. It's like, like that was a big deal. But learning how to compete is what happens when it gets tough? How quickly do I shut down? How do I learn how to, even, like Dave Smart will talk about this, even players learning how to cheat, not necessarily like totally against the rules, but try to manipulate the game so they're going to win somehow, right? And
the game within the game.
Competing at a high level are really important skills, right?
It's interesting. Okay, well, we got to wrap it up. I think before we went live, I said, hey, we need about an hour, and I said, if we start creeping into the hour and a half section, we're just going to lose listeners. Sure. Although I'm enjoying the conversation, but we'll wrap up with a question, and you've given so much advice through your stories and kind of telling, saying, hey, what you do, what you've learned. But I want to ask a direct question. So if you could give advice to coaches who are young and they're just starting to coach, what's some advice that you'd give them?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's maybe a few things. One, I would say, don't say no to opportunities. So one of the things that helped me was I just got more, I don't know if I got more reps than everyone, but I'm certainly most. So there was a 15-year period there where I don't think anyone coached as much as me, maybe in the country. I coached about 5 or 6 teams a year, ran the largest summer camp program, attended every clinic, watched every video, did everything, right? And I just didn't say no. Every time someone said, hey, do you want to coach this team? I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I just coached every single team. I taught every NCCP class, volunteered in every board, was just everywhere. And I would say, for me, that goes on my philosophy of when people say you have to be at the right place at the right time. So I think that's always a really interesting phrase, because what I always say to younger players and young coaches is the right place at the right time has never been in your basement playing video games or watching YouTube. That's never been the right place at the right time, right? No. So the only way to be at the right place, to increase your chances of being right place, right time, is to be in many places, many times. And that helps, that just improves your odds, right? So, and then the second piece that I would say is find mentors. Going back to what we very first talked about, right? Seek out people that can help you and learn from them, right? There's lots of different people, and don't just seek out one because you're only going to find kind of one perspective, but seek out many, spend time with them, hang out with them. Most people will allow you to just kind of be around and learn and see what they think and why they think those things, right? I think you're doing those two things, you're going to go a long way.
Well, it's great advice. I mean, again, like I said, you've given tons of advice, told some good stories. I appreciate your time, Kirby. I know you are in the midst of starting a season after a global pandemic. You've been out of the game, I should say, for a little while. I guess the rest was probably nice, but you're back at it now. So I do appreciate you taking the time with us right now. And just thank you.
Thanks, Darcy. I appreciate it. Anytime, man, and good luck with this endeavor. I'm anxious to hear other great stories around the world of Manitoba basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kirby, take care.
See ya.
All right. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please like, subscribe, follow, and share this series, and reach out to us with your comments on the show. Thanks again for joining us.